Here we are, folks. It's another week of the Rec Poker Podcast. We have assembled the crew. We're here in the booth. We're nailing our audio cues. Life could be worse. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Jim Reed, Bluff Sterini in the home game. And if you want to learn more about me, you can go to rec.poker/crew, where you can sort of have a little taster's choice of all the different members of the Rec and Crew. It's a great group. Some of them are here tonight. Crew, why don't you introduce yourself and let Rec Poker Nation know where they can find you?
Well, I'm Chris Jones. You can find me on 5B5 on Twitter and 5x5 on PokerStars.
And I'm Keith Brandt, and I'm Monkey System everywhere.
I'm Kim Kilroy. I am PetBet33 in most places, Fergie56 on our home games.
I'm Rob Washam, and I'm Radman50 just about everywhere.
Thanks, gang. I've got the best job in the world, so I just get to show up every week and talk poker with this panel of wizards. I also want to thank website AMP and the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino that make this possible through their support every week. So thanks, team. So it's Monday night. It's after the Chats edition of the podcast, and we are playing in the nightly home game. We're stealing each other's play money chips and trying to win that old bronze pin up there. It looks good. You can see it on hats. Oh, actually, I guess, Keith, you're the only one rocking the pins right now. Looking sharp, though. I like that. And we're going to pull a post from the Rec Poker forums, just like we do every week. And we always invite our premium members to come and join us here on the show. If there's ever a member that's made a post in the forums that they want to talk about with the panel, they've got an open invitation. We record most Monday nights. This week, we've got John Crowell joining us. He's going to be mostly focusing on the home game because this is the last day of the month that we're recording this, and he's been killing it in the leaderboard. So I'm going to take his post here, which is about range betting, value betting, pot odds, and equity denial. And John, you can just let me know if I'm missing anything or if we want a little more follow-up information. You just keep on stealing all those chips in the home game. Job number one. So John's got a great attitude. You can tell he's got a learner's mindset. So he opens his post right off the bat just saying, not sure I know enough to even ask the right questions here, but here it goes. And John, I think this is an area where this kind of terminology can be confusing for people, or maybe it's kind of esoteric in how it gets applied. And I thought it was just a great chance for us to go over some of these concepts. So I'm just going to walk through the post a little bit here, and then group, let's just talk about the expressions as they come up. So range betting is the first one that comes up here. And John, you say, I'm talking about the idea of setting frequency of actions and sizes of bets based on your opponent's range versus your own range, not the idea of betting my full range as the term is sometimes used. I understand one of the main purposes of this is to balance my range and make me less exploitable. So yes, you're kind of talking about two kinds of range betting. Range betting, I think, as we typically think about it, is going to be bets that we make with our entire range, or some people sometimes use it to mean a segment of the range. Rob, what's your take on that?
Well, I think typically what we're doing is we're taking we have a range, our opponent has a range. Now, when we talk about betting, we're talking typically the flop, right? We're talking about a flop situation, and it all depends if you're in position, out of position, blah, blah, blah. But you're taking your hand versus their range to determine which hands within your range you want to c-bet. So there's certain hands in your range that you're going to c-bet at a higher frequency than others. But overall, your frequency is going to be X for that range, or for whatever position you're in. That's the way I kind of look at it.
And sorry.
Yeah, no, please go ahead, Kim.
No, I was going to say that I look at it similar to the way Rob looks at it, but I look at it as much more flop dependent as to what we're going to do with our range. So our range would bet totally differently. Say we're the initial raiser from middle position and we get called by the big blind, and the flop comes with an ace and two undercards. We're going to pretty well bet all of our range. If we raise with pocket deuces, if we raise with 7-8 suited, we're just going to bet here on this ace high dry flop. So that's sort of a range bet type of board. So our range bet comes into effect depending on what the flop is. If we have a flop that is 6, 7, 8, 2 spades, then we're not going to be betting nearly as much of our range. We might only bet 50 or 60% of our range now instead of virtually 100% of our range.
Yeah. So one thing
You said the same thing. You said the same thing I did. That's exactly what I meant in what I said.
Right.
It's based on the flop, and then the two cards that you have. Which portion of your range you're going to bet at what frequency?
And I just want to draw our attention to a distinction there. So talking about like a range bet or range betting specifically is going to be that action that you take with your entire range. And then the other thing that we're getting at here is just making the assumptions about our opponent's range, and then using that information to decide what part of our range is going to continue in a certain way. And so, actual range betting, and correct me if I'm wrong, gang, doesn't happen that often. It doesn't happen that often. You get to a spot where you're going to be betting with your entire range. Often, it's going to be in a spot that's very board texture dependent. You've got the pre-flop aggression, that kind of thing. Usually what you're going to be doing is betting with some of your range and checking with some of your range. And you're going to use your opponent's range and how it intersects with the board to decide whether you will or not. And John says, so what do you call what we're learning with Gareth? Okay, great. So John's referring to the Gareth James study groups that we're doing through the MTT Poker Academy on Saturdays. And what we're doing with Gareth, so let's use the flop as an example. So he's broken down the flop into various different textures. And then he's broken the kind of hands that we can have into different kinds of hands that we can have as well. And basically, we're looking at certain flop textures. We're going to see bet at a very high frequency, and certain other flop textures we're going to see bet at a lower frequency. So flop Ace King 2, we're going to see bet at a higher frequency than a flop 9, 7, 6, all the same suit, or let's say two tone. So
the bet size also changes.
And the bet size will also change. Yes, great point, Rob. Great point. So our betting range is going to depend on the flop and our position and all this. But to keep it simple, we're going to have different betting ranges on different flops, which means we're going to have different checking ranges on different flops. And hands that we might choose to c-bet on an Ace King 2 board, we might choose to check behind on the 9-8-7 board, or whichever example I used there. So what we're learning with Gareth is basically, okay, I see what you're saying. It's how our entire range should be expressed. Not all of it's going to be through betting. Some of it's going to be betting and some of it's going to be checking, but we're looking at the entire range. Okay, so it's basically it's not range betting so much as just our range analysis. We're looking at our entire range, not just our betting range, and we're seeing which combos show up in the in each one there. And it's mostly just accounting for every combo in your hand. If you want to think about it like that, like you start pre-flop and you have this wide range of hands, and then you fold some of them and you continue with some of them. And all those hands that you continue with have to go somewhere by the end of the hand. You're either going to fold them or you're going to get them to showdown, or someone else is going to fold or something like that. And we, as recreational players, we get caught just thinking about what are we going to do with these two cards in front of us, or maybe even cards that might be like this, or other cards that we wish we had in this moment. But we don't really think about what are we going to do with those other little parts of our range that aren't sexy or fun, but nevertheless got here anyway. But we need to know what we're going to do with them. And that's what we're doing with Gareth James and the MTT Poker Academy, is saying, what do we do with our entire range?
Now, does the use of this term also factor in exploitative play? Like how we're going to change it if our opponent, say he's on the button instead of the big blind, if he's a calling station or if he's over folding, does the use of this term apply there, or do we go to different terminology now?
The term range betting?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, just me personally, I only use the term range bet when I'm referring to spots where I'm just betting with every combo in my in my range. So anytime that applied, that's when I would use it. So, but the concept of visualizing the entire range, I think we would do that in every spot. I don't know if that answers your question, Keith.
Yeah, if villain's over folding, we could range bet with our any flop.
Yes, I see. So if we had a note on this player that says, if we just had a note that, for instance, every time someone bets 6 big blinds, they fold, and we knew that every time we bet 6 big blinds, they would fold, then we could just bet 6 blinds with our entire range, for instance. And that would be a good one. Or any spot where you can say that they, although I guess we wouldn't want to do that with our nutted hands in that case. Interestingly.
Right.
Okay.
True.
But basically. It just doesn't come up that often that you make usually they're just good bluffing spots where you're betting 100% of your range there.
And I don't think I've ever heard it referred to as range betting. I think you use your range to determine when you're going to see bet. So it's not really called range betting. It's called see betting. And your range is going to inform the times that you are going to see bet versus the times you're not, how frequently you're going to do it, and what bet sizes you're going to use. To Keith's point, you want to be exploitative when you have a person that overfolds. Then you can take more of your range that you may check and you may bet with that now because you know that he's going to overfold. So maybe some of those hands that you would normally check in a GTO solved situation, you are now going to bet because you know he's going to fold.
Okay. Yes, I like that. That's exactly correct. And John, I'm just going to unmute you here. Actually, you can unmute yourself there and jump in anytime. There you go.
Okay. So that helps me get to the heart of my question, which was, again, I was just using the wrong term, but this range analysis that Jim's talking about and that we learned with Gareth, we learned that with if I'm in position and I was the aggressor, on certain boards, I'm supposed to see bet a certain amount. Sometimes it's a high bet, sometimes it's a low bet. But sometimes I find that is in conflict with other ideas of what I want to do with a hand. For instance, there's a board, maybe I have pocket aces and the board comes out ace, king, queen. And according to Gareth's or the solver's answer, I'm supposed to bet that very high frequency, and I'm supposed to make a big bet on it. But since I'm sitting there with 3 aces, I think I want to keep somebody in by value betting, but value betting small. And so there are times to me when my motives are in contrast with what this range analysis has taught us. And I'm wondering if the range analysis is in fact another level of learning that I'm finally just getting to, and I have to leave these other motivations behind and just sort of let the range analysis take over and follow that completely.
Kim, you look like you wanted to jump in there.
I did for part of the answer. When we're betting a lot, when we're betting frequently, so say it's an ace or king high board and we are in position versus the big blind, for instance. So our range is very strong on those boards and we're betting almost 100% of our range. I'm not close. So when we're betting so frequently, our bet sizing should generally be small. And the only time it should be larger is not dependent on our hand strength, but dependent on whether or not there's straight draws on the board, for instance, or something else, some type of draws. If there's double straight draws or something, then we can bet higher.
Yeah, and John's referring to this. We saw this amazing spreadsheet that Gareth put out that it was all sort of, he did the math for us. And if you're listening, you really got to join our premium membership for $5. Use the code RecPoker and just join these MTT sessions with Gareth James. There's so much fantastic knowledge in there on these Saturday sessions. So do come along and join that. And he goes into some detail about the sizes you should use on various board textures. But John, I think the one thing I wanted to address in your question there, this is the question of poker. We kind of talked about this in the last episode where Chris was playing a hand in the Venom, and we said sort of like, so how balanced do you even want to be here? Like, how much do you care about playing your entire range versus playing this one hand this time? Because you just hit the nail on the head, John. So
I have a thought on that too.
Yeah, please.
And I think it's so to kind of get back to your question about whether this is like the next level of poker learning or thinking or something like that. It may be, and it really, really depends on who you're playing against, right? If you're playing against players who you know that you can bet big when you've got it and small when you don't, and they're not going to notice the difference. If you can, take them, to when you hit your set of aces and you can just bet huge, and they're just going to keep calling you because they don't quite recognize the fact that you're betting big when you've got value and you're betting small when you bluff. You're in a great game, and you can just do that all the time, right? But the moment that somebody starts to pick up on that is the moment we have to start incorporating some of these tools and some of these ideas. The moment that somebody says, aha, I get it. You're betting big when you have it. You're betting small when you don't. Now you're in a precarious situation. And what you're doing by betting small with those aces in that situation is you're protecting the times when you opened with 9-10 of hearts, or this 7-8 of hearts or something, and you're still betting that board. Now they have to respect the fact that you can still have aces, and you're going to get a lot more. You're protecting your bluffs, basically, is what you're doing when you incorporate this kind of level of approach to how you're taking on a hand. And that is really important if you have opponents who will sort of be able to pick up on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think I understood it that way. It's just it's helpful to hear you say that I want to employ that tool when my opponents can pick up on my unbalanced play, and I don't necessarily have to employ that tool when I can exploit the opponent.
Yep. Well said. And I think, and this really is, we talk about GTO or balanced play as being unexploitable. And it's where we should start when we build our strategies. And then as soon as we get information about our opponents that lets us know how they're deviating from a balanced play, then we should start deviating ourselves to exploit them to the max, is sort of how. And if they're not thinking about GTO stuff, if they're not thinking about ranges, then you're out leveling yourself by getting into some fancy play syndrome stuff that we are all very familiar with over here. Setting traps for people that they won't even see. But ultimately, the one thing that you said earlier was, I've got this one hand in front of me, this pair of aces here, and one thing that we as poker players need to decide is, am I interested in all the times I'm going to be in this spot, making the most money with all the hands I'll ever have in this spot, and in which case I should play in a way that maximizes the profit over the entire range? Or is this a spot where I just want to get this player to give me as many of their chips as possible on this hand, where I happen to have aces?
And I've seen it start to work already just after the the webinar a few weeks ago. I've gotten into these positions, and I think to myself, and Gareth Solver says I should bet here and I should bet big. I maybe have 10 Jack, and the flop comes out with King Queen in it, or something that's not even that good for me, but it's two broadways or whatever. And I decided to follow the solver solution, and I bet, and thinking, normally I would think, this guy's definitely got a king or he's definitely got a queen, and suddenly they're folding, and I don't even have anything, and they're folding to me. So,
and that's just when we start thinking about ranges instead of hands, we can also, like you put in your post here, we can visualize our opponent's range, and when we know that most of their range does not like that flop very well, it does give you that kind of confidence to go and make those bluff bets and take it away. And it just feels like it's a better investment when you can visualize that entire range.
There's nothing better than raising pre-flop with pocket fives, getting a flop of ace, queen, 3, and then c-betting and having everybody fold.
Yep.
Well, we have a backdoor straight draw. What do you
That's right.
well, I remember, I think, doing it with 7-9 when an ace and a queen came out on the board.
Yeah.
And it was exactly that. And I got the fold.
Right.
I never would have done that a month ago.
Yeah, Chris points out backdoor quads. Yeah, that's right. And John, that's just it, right? Because the cards that you have in your hand, they're private information. But your opponent's making assumptions about your range, whether you know it or not, they are. Whether they even know it or not, they are. And so you can represent those parts of your range that you don't have in your hand right now. And that's where it gets extremely valuable to start thinking about ranges. And I think it is kind of a next level of, for me, in my own poker learning, when I started thinking about ranges and how empty they really were, that really helped me as a bluffer gain the courage to pull the trigger on a lot of those post-flop spots. But it's really tied. It's almost foolish to talk about ranges without also talking about board textures, because different board textures intersect really differently with different ranges. And so you can almost, unless you're talking pre-flop, it really has to be tied to a specific board texture. And then there's an art to that too, and a science, unfortunately. But it does take, and those Gareth James spreadsheets, and the way to think about it is breaking it down to those different kinds of flops and different kinds of textures. And we've done this in our own rec poker studies. Chris Jones has put these dynamic versus static board textures and that kind of stuff. We've done seminars on that. So
Rob, you did make a couple of attempts. Thank you, to answer my question in the forum.
Yes.
But can you talk a little bit more about equity denial?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting subject because what you're trying to do with equity denial, say you have that hand like 7-8, and you happen to hit a flop that has a 7 as the top card. So now you've got 7-8, which isn't much. You've got top pair with a horrible kicker. And you could have a couple people sitting there with overcards. They could have king, queen, jack, ace, king, whatever. Now, they have a lot of equity in that hand because any card over an 8 could be a trouble for you, right? So that's when you are going to bet certain sizes on certain flop textures to get those types of hands to fold, because now you're denying them the equity that they actually have in the hand. So
the right
that's
odds.
just exactly.
You're pricing them out of the hand.
Right. So if they do make the call, they're making a mistake, which is that, and that goes along with the flush draw, for instance. If you bet big enough so that they are making a mistake by calling with a flush draw, then they're making a mistake. They might get there and they might get there and take the pot anyway. But the fact that you didn't give them the proper pot odds to call is denying them the equity that they have in the hand.
So if you make a bet that's too small, then you are not denying them equity, and you're making the mistake because now they have the right equity to call.
But there are times when I have a made hand and they have a flush draw.
And you have to deny their equity.
I don't want to deny them their equity.
No, you do, but you can't make this bet too small. Like if you make it too small a bet. So that's when you have to sort of like study the odds of them hitting a flush draw.
I do understand that, but if I have a better hand, don't I want to keep them in the hand for value?
Yes, so you have to bet enough so that they're making the mistake by calling.
Yeah, you
Okay,
don't want them to be able to. You want to you want to give them opportunities to make mistakes. That's the
Right.
best way to think about that.
Okay,
Yeah,
but
by sizing.
then it comes back to them. They either make the mistake or they don't.
Right.
But I don't entice them by betting smaller to keep them in the hand.
Chris, did you have something on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think one of the things that goes in line with the idea of equity denial is the idea of fold equity, and that they kind of go hand in hand. They're sort of related terms, and the idea is that part of the reason, I think we have to ask ourselves often why we're betting. I mean, that should be a question we're asking ourselves consistently when we make a bet. I am making a bet for equity denial / value. I am making a bet as a bluff, and I am targeting this kind of hand with this bluff, this kind of better hand to fold. And what we're doing there is we're helping ourselves understand why we're betting. And so that, because to me, one of the reasons when we have 7-8, right, and it's a 7 high flop, but there's 2 clubs on it, we probably have the best hand. If it's a 7-4 deuce flop with 2 clubs, we probably have the best hand. And if somebody has 2 clubs in their hand, there's nothing better than them folding. Yes, it's great if they call and no clubs hit, and that's great. But they probably have cards that are going to be above ours, in those club holdings. They can hit those too. If they've got Jack 10 of clubs, they have a lot of equity. Let's take this is not a great hand to begin with. This is awesome. If they fold, that's just wonderful.
That's right. So it's for protection as well.
Right.
So when you have an overcard, say an overpair to the board. So instead of top pair, you now have an overpair. Say you have pocket aces or pocket kings, and it comes 7 high with 2 clubs, and you don't have a club in your hand. Now you can bet, but you may not need to bet as big as you might want to bet when you've just hit the 7, and now you're betting for protection and for equity denial.
Although
But
here we're already talking about having different sizes for different parts of our range, though. So we're already kind of getting away from that standardized approach, which is fine, because we're
well, often there are 2 different bet sizes.
Yeah. Also true.
When the solvers will often come with a bunch of different bet sizes that you should use.
That's really the heart of my question right there.
Aha.
Are those times, is that what's going to make me decide if the solver says bet 96% of the time and check 4% of the time or whatever? I'm reversing
round it to 100
here.
I'd round it to 100, yeah.
Yeah.
But the bet size is what you're getting at, and the bet size really has to do with the flop texture. Is going to inform what the bet size should be, and as part of that, the solver is already built in that the reasons why you're betting the different sizes is either to leverage the advantage you have knowing your own cards, or realizing your own equity, or preventing your opponent's equity realization. So those are the 2 things that you're trying to do. And the solver's suggestions as what the bet sizes should be are based on those concepts.
Okay.
In a lot of the situations, you're going to have a choice that's roughly 50-50 between 2 bet sizes. Okay. And now you're thinking about exploitative play.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got the hand and he likes to call with something worse, and he'll call when you price him out of his draw, then you make the big bet size. If he's aggressive, he's going to check raise you a lot, or something when he's got something he could check raise you with, maybe. Then you'd go with the smaller sizes. So it depends on, this is when you see those 2 different, those mixed strategies, and they're roughly even, and like 2/3, 1/3, or closer than that. Now you're thinking about exploitative play. Those are your exploitative opportunities.
And John, if you want to go back, and for all our listeners too, if you want to go back into the Rec Poker seminar archive, we did a whole seminar on flop texture and betting, and I think it's one of the best ones we've done. I think it's really good conversation, some really good content there. I'm trying to pull it up right now. For some reason, my internet seems to be slowed down. I can't figure it, but it's go look for flop texture and betting, and it's a seminar we did, and there's some really good content on it, I think.
Yeah, I remember that one. I think it was last spring. That was
It should be early 2020, I think, is when we did it, right?
Oh yeah, I keep thinking I'm still writing 2021 in all my checks.
It was early 2020 that we did it, I believe.
Yeah, that was before even I joined.
Yeah, there you go, Keith.
It's February of 2021. Flop texture.
It was just there. There you go. And John, one thing that you've hit on here in your post is that the answer to so many poker questions is it depends.
It depends.
It's the answer so often because there are so many competing factors that it's sort of like there's a lot of assumptions that we have to make, right? Because we don't have perfect information. So different people might make different assumptions about what your opponent's range is, and they might also make different assumptions about what actions your opponent might take based on your actions. So that's hard. But then also, a lot of it's going to come down to you, the poker player, needing to decide in the moment, okay, am I going to listen to this part of my poker experience and teaching, or am I going to listen to this part? Because they are kind of telling me different things. And your job becomes, you have to be the one who decides which ones to kind of prioritize, which ones are more important. So an example for that might be you're coming up on the bubble of a satellite tournament or something. So you're going to look at all the different factors in your hand, but you're going to say, okay, now one thing that's really important that I can't forget about is ICM here. I can't go bust. So I'm going to put more emphasis on that when I'm building my strategy for this hand. I might play it a little more passively or something like that. Another situation you might be in and say, well, okay, so this player to my left is just raising me every time I open pre-flop. So you're gonna have that new piece of information kind of like, okay, even though ace 10 offsuit has blockers and I can open folded, I'm just not even going to play it here because in this particular spot, having a blocker is kind of like less important to having the kind of hand I want to be able to play with post flop or stuff like that. I feel like as I learn more about poker, it's almost a question of just like knowing or continuing to learn what to be thinking about in the hand and what factors are the most important ones and which ones to prioritize, because our brain space is also a limited resource, some of us more than others. So you really have to put it to good use effectively as you can.
Yep.
You mentioned, so your meta question, what should I be thinking about, or should my decision to bet be solely based on what Gareth's saying or about this particular spot, my hand? And that is the great question in poker, I think, is that sort of, am I betting my hand or am I playing my hand or am I playing my range? Does anyone on the panel have any good thoughts for when to prioritize one or the other? I mean, Chris kind of hit on the main one, which is if your opponent's not thinking in ranges, then you don't need some fancy trap with shiny lures. You just have a big club and you hit them with the club. You take your strong hands and you hit them with them. And if, then you can get it. Yes, right, Chris. Yeah.
I mean, and reverse, like I have notes on players that are like, this player is bad. And what that tends to mean to me is do not bluff them. Right. Like this is going to be a player that's not going to understand that they should be folding in this situation, and they're going to call down with some marginal hand. So like the questions you asked about, do I play my range? Do I play my hand? I think the first question you start with is not either of those questions is who am I playing? Right. And where are they thinking about in their poker sort of like levels? And if they're never going to fold a top pair type holding and you're like so certain that's what they have, don't try to bump them off of it.
Mm-hmm. And size up and deviate from all the stuff.
Right. And if you've got value in that situation, you can beat top pair. And again, you're certain,
right,
then like forget all these like GTO sizings, just jam it on them and like, let's get all their chips. So like if you've got to like figure out what kind of opponents you're playing.
Yeah. And don't feel like responsible to theory either. I do this all the time. I shoot myself in the foot so many times because I'm like, oh, I guess I have to call here because he's probably doing it with all these other things. I'm like, oh no, he just had the nuts. Oh, I guess I didn't.
They always have it.
Yeah.
Sometimes they just have it. Sometimes they have it. I've been calling down a lot lately to buy poker, and they haven't had it. So.
Right.
Yeah, they have it if their breathing changes between 2 minutes, right?
That's right. You got it. You got it. Thank you, Ryan LaPlante.
I'm never going to forget that one.
That's a good segue into his question about value betting and what value bets are.
Well, sure. John, do you have any other questions about that or any more points?
What you had said there really hit home. Be responsible to theory.
Right.
And that goes back to my sort of the heart of the question as well. Am I supposed to be responsible to theory? And it sounds like yes, when it's appropriate.
Yeah, but don't feel handcuffed to it. Right. That's the real key there, I think. And just listen to your, the more poker you play, you can just listen to your insights more when it comes to that.
Most of the money we make in poker is not from sticking to theory. It's from exploiting our opponents.
Yeah, I think Rob? GTO is just the base that gives you the base strategy that you could use for every situation. And then you deviate from that based on your opponent's tendencies. Mm-hmm. That's what it's all about. So I don't think none of the players that we're playing against are playing GTO. Right. You might see that in the super high roller bowl on TV or something like that. You might see a lot of GTO type play, but when you're talking our home games, our weeklies at the casinos, you're looking at those players and you're looking at ways to exploit what they're doing. And you have this basic knowledge of GTO, which tells you what is the right way to do it. So you can recognize when they're not doing it the right way and then take advantage of that.
And John, I'll tell you this. If Gareth James was playing in our home games, he would also not be playing a GTO approach. He would be abandoning his spreadsheets that he shared with us to exploit the mistakes that the players in our games are making. Because ultimately, what you want to be doing is you want to be exploiting the mistakes that your players are going to make, which means you need to get good at player typing, start making good assumptions about the mistakes they're going to make, and then you can start setting those traps. So it's really less about, having your own style of poker that you play all the time. And it's more about having like a solid base of theory that you're confident with, and then choosing how to flex that into more and less aggressive styles of play, depending on who's across from you. Kim, you want to move on to value betting, and then we'll wrap this.
If we're gonna get so you want to read what you had there, John, on value betting, or?
Yeah, John, would you like to? Or
I don't even have.
You don't have it up.
In front of me.
I'll jump right in. So he said early on, and I was taught this too, John. If you have a good hand, you want to bet as much as you think you can get them to call with to make the most money possible. And I understand that if someone pays attention, this can be exploited by them overfolding. And yeah, I think it's a value bet if it can get called by a worse hand. That's what I always think of a value bet as. If you make a bet so big that it's only going to get called by better hands than yours, it's no longer a value bet. It's effectively a bluff. And I learned this phrasing on the Thinking Poker podcast about 3,000 years ago. But you can contort your opponent's range by the size of the bets that you make. So if you make really small bets, they're going to continue with a really wide range. If you make really big bets, they're going to continue with only a small, tighter part of that range. So when you are value betting, you're kind of value targeting. You're saying, okay, I've got a set. So how much can I want to get paid by a 2-pair hand. How much am I going to bet as a value bet in that spot? if you think he can have, they can have a lot of 2 pairs or something.
There's
Yeah,
also
Kim?
thin value betting.
Yep.
And thin value betting is making a very small bet with a very mediocre hand, where you only have minimal amount of value, but you think you'll get called by worse. So you might have middle pair on a board and think you'll get called by bottom pair on the
Mhm.
board, for instance. So
And I
there's
think it
thin
doesn't.
value bets too.
And the only thing I would quibble with there, Kim, is I feel like it doesn't necessarily have to be a small bet necessarily. It just has to be a not very powerful hand. Like it.
If you think you can get called.
If
by
you think
that,
you can
right.
get called, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's really about what is my opponent's calling range going to look like, and then your range and your sizing should always be tied together there, Chris.
Well, and part of the question I think that is being asked here is, doesn't that get in the way of balance and this idea of, I understand that if someone pays attention to this, they can be exploited by overfolding. And I think one of the things to think about with these ideas is, I think the further, certainly there are, if you're up against, Fedor Holtz or somebody like that, they're going to be practicing this down to every street and every bet sizing and all that kind of stuff. But I think that one of the things that the further away we get from the both pre-flop and the flop, those are points where I think a lot of players have some fundamental understanding of, this is what typical sizing should look like. This is what a big C bet looks like. This is what a small C bet looks like. This is what they tend to mean. This is what that means on this board. I think even, a lot of players are that sophisticated. And then the more we get towards like turns and rivers, those are points where those things still matter. And against certain opponents, they still matter a lot. But against certain opponents, I think then bet sizing and value targeting can start to deviate a lot more from those sort of like more better understood, maybe more practiced, more rote parts of poker. And if you do think you can get value out of somebody on a turn or a river and bet really big, go for it. I think players aren't as comfortable or practiced in those situations. And I think the more you get away from those early parts of the hand, the more that deviates for at least the larger player pool. That's my opinion, at least.
Do you think we can make large pot size value bets without being able to make large pot size bluffs in our range?
No. I don't think we. Well, not in. It depends, right? If we're up against that exact type of player that I'm talking about, that that you just can't bluff, right? Then yes.
In a non-balanced way.
So then that's when we make it more opponent dependent.
Yeah.
Right.
But in my opinion, I don't ever think I should do, unless I find an opponent like that, which is a very specific example.
And
I
hold
don't
them
think
close
I should
if you
ever
do.
make.
Don't ever let them go.
Yeah, I don't ever think I should make a pot size bet, say on the river, without being able to make a pot size bluff on the river. I never make bluffs on the river, then I can never make those bets on the river, right?
No, you never make bluffs on the river anyway,
I said
Kim.
if I could, if I can't do it.
No, I agree. I definitely agree. I think we have to be capable of bluffing, and I'm just talking about this idea of value betting and like this idea of like, aren't we exploited if we make these different sizes? I think we can start to stray from like, we can make some bigger bets.
There are some opponents that I just don't think will ever bluff pot size on the river or 3/4 pot on the river.
For sure.
So I am always folding.
Right.
Sure, that's an exploit.
Yes.
You're exploiting them by folding.
Yes.
Right? So that's what you're saying in that, John, that,
Yes.
that's that. So you have to be able to make pot size bluffs as well.
Okay.
And that's the hard thing to do.
Yes, it is.
Right. Yeah, it's true. And
Be careful about the opponent.
But it all comes down to the opponent, right? Like, what are they paying attention to? And are they going to, because then you get into these leveling wars with other players, which is probably the most fun you can have in poker, honestly. Like, that's probably what I like most about poker is just, what is it? Argue with a Sicilian when death is on the line, that kind of thing. So it's, it really is about playing that person. Boy, that's a lot of word
Exactly.
salad there.
Mm.
I just that's why I like live poker so much, because
Yeah.
nobody ever thinks I'm bluffing for a huge bet on the river.
Right.
Ever.
Right. Right.
It's just so easy to do.
I'm writing that down, Kim, for next time we're playing live. I'm going to call down those big river bets. So John, I think it's another one of those. Are you playing the hand are you playing the two cards in your hand, or are you playing your range? Because you can, if you're playing your range, then I think you want to be more standardized, like we're talking about. And then if you're going to exploit, then exploit to the moon and play your hand against that player. And then, just be thoughtful about which players you got to play your range against for your own protection, and which players you could just play your hand against. And the other point that Chris was getting at earlier, I think also, the further in the hand you get, the less balance matters as well. Even not only are players kind of like less used to playing the river than they are the turn, than they are the flop, but you're already so far down the decision tree. It's just less important, in my opinion, in the games that we're playing, to be balanced as you get that far down. So you can.
And there are a lot of situations in poker related to that where, we talk about opponents who are sort of inelastic to sizing. That's a term you'll sometimes hear, like that. Like, I can bet 25%, like theory says here on the river here, but I've got the best hand and I'm pretty sure about it. And I don't think this opponent's going to fold for anything. So I'm going to go 2x pot, and like, they're going to call me.
Yeah.
And that's great.
And if I was Chris's backer and he told me that he bet 25% pot with the nuts because the solver told him to, in a spot where he could have gotten called for a two size the pot bet, then I would be furious at him for playing GTO in that way, because he had a chance to make a better decision for his poker game, which was to exploit that player. Weird way of getting at that, but I think you know what I mean. You're kind of like leaving money on the table if you don't exploit players. So,
no, actually, that made it very clear.
Yeah. Okay.
So when you're your own backer, be furious at yourself when you think
That's
about
it.
it afterwards.
Yes, because we are all our own backers, and even as recreational players, we might not have a bankroll. Maybe we've got a budget instead, but that's that money comes from somewhere, and part of being a serious player, the only way we get to keep track is with money, or with chips at least. So winning the most when you can win and losing the least when you can lose, that makes a big difference, because everyone wins with aces and everyone loses with 2-7. So if you can lose less,
You win with aces?
sometimes.
I was going to say,
Good point.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. But basically, you make money in poker by not doing things reciprocally with everybody else. So if you can win bigger pots than they do and lose smaller pots than they do, that's already going to make a big difference towards your bottom line. I knew we were going to find some fun rabbit holes on this one, gang. John, was there anything else on that subject while we've got you here that we could talk about a little further? I really liked that range. Yeah.
No, I think that sums it up for me.
Beautiful. Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts. And sometimes it's tough for people to come out there and admit they don't have all the answers. And it's great having people like you that put questions out there and want to learn. And how can we ever learn if we only ever talk about things that we perfectly understand? So I appreciate that.
I have one thing to say also, and that's that a lot of players still tend to look for the monsters under the bed. And just because a flop has 2 spades in it doesn't mean your opponent automatically has spades in their hand and a flush draw. Like, it doesn't mean you have to price out all the flush draws right away. Right? Like, it's not, they probably don't have a flush draw. If they call a big bet, now maybe they do have a flush draw.
Right. We've contorted their range that way. Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, you don't have to automatically think that you have to, just because there's one draw out there, that we have to now bet differently.
Yeah, that was a big thing for me. Just visualizing the entire range that our opponent could have there and realizing just how much of that was empty space. That'll do wonders for your red line once you start.
Flopzilla for that is
Yeah.
great.
Oh, Flopzilla is excellent for that. Yeah, that's a great one. And we have a few Flopzilla videos here and there around Rec Poker. If people want to find out more about that. And I know Keith and Chris are also very active with Flopzilla.
I
and
actually
other
use
programs.
Flopzilla quite a bit as well.
Oh yeah, great! It's a phenomenal program. We don't have any professional relationship with them. We don't make any money, but I would tell everyone, go get Flopzilla. It's worth the $30 one time. It's the premier range analysis software out there. You can tell them Jim sent you, but it won't make any difference. You don't get a discount, and they won't say anything to me either. So. All right. Well, this is fantastic. Thanks, gang. John, I hope we get a chance to have you on again sometime. I've really enjoyed seeing you in the strategy conversations we've had, and I can't wait to be a bigger part of your poker journey. I want to see you playing in the Venom next year with Chris.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you to Website AMP and Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, and to Rob, Kim, Jack, John, Chris, and Keith, and of course, Steve Fredland, and all you listening. Thanks so much. See you again soon.